Hello and welcome back to another EDH deck tech idea. Today we are taking a look at the cutest puppy in MTG. Phelia, Exuberant Shepherd, is a 2 mana 2/2 with flash, and when it attacks, exile up to one other target non-land permanent. At the beginning of the next end step, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. If it entered under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Phelia. Everybody is going to know what your turn 2 play is, as you will just pass the turn and in the end step of your opponent you will just flash in Phelia. From then on you want to accelerate your game plan by flickering creatures that have powerful ETB triggers. With that you also grow Phelia, and in the worst case scenario you will simply flicker your opponent's creatures, so you can keep attacking with Phelia. When it comes to the bombs in this deck that we want to flicker, we want to go for Avenger of Heliod, a 6 mana 1/3, and when it enters the battlefield create a number of 1/1 white soldier creature tokens equal to your devotion to white. This is a powerful board building machine, and especially when you can flicker it, you can create an army of soldiers out of nowhere. Angel of Ruins, a 7 mana 5/7 with flying, and when it enters the battlefield exile up to 2 target artifacts and or enchantments, and you can also plains cycle this card for 2 mana and discarding it to find a plains card into your hand. Angel of Ruins will help you to keep the board in check from nasty artifacts and enchantments, and it is also a great blocker. Angel of Indemnity, a 6 mana 5/5 with flying and lifelink, and when it enters the battlefield, return target permanent card with mana value 4 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. You can also encall the angel from your graveyard by paying 8 mana, and then you will create a token copy of it for each opponent that you have, and these tokens will have to attack this opponent. It is worth mentioning that all of the encore tokens also have the ETB trigger, so you will get 3 other permanents back from your graveyard if you have still 3 opponents. But Angel of Indemnity is definitely worth flickering as it cares about permanent cards, so you can get back a lot of different stuff from your graveyard. Of course we have to play Sun Titan, a 6 mana 6/6 with vigilance, and when it enters or attacks you may return target permanent card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Sun Titan is definitely a great card playing in this deck, but in most cases you don't really want to flicker this one as it also triggers on attack, so you would give out 6 damage at your opponents if you flicker this one, so better just go with Angel of Indemnity, but in the worst case you can also flicker Sun Titan. You want to flicker Reverend Hoplite, a 5 mana 1/2, and when it enters the battlefield create a number of 1/1 white human soldier creature tokens equal to your devotion to white. Aside from Avenger of Heliod, this is also a great token generation creature, so always keep looking for these cards. Finally we play Supply Runners, a 5 mana 2/2, and when it enters the battlefield put a 1/1 counter on each other creature you control. These dogs will reinforce your other small creatures with the power that they need, and by flickering them they will grow your army even more. We are going to do what white can do best, and that is ramping, by playing cards like Solemn Simulacrum, a 4 mana 2/2, and when it enters the battlefield you may search a library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped and then shuffle. When Solemn dies you may draw a card. You play Loyal Warhound, a 2 mana 3/1 with vigilance, and when it enters the battlefield if an opponent controls more lands than you, search a library for a basic plains card, put it onto the battlefield tapped and then shuffle. A great card that is also very helpful for your devotion count is Knight of the White Orchid, a 2 mana 2/2 with first strike, and when it enters the battlefield if an opponent controls more lands than you, you may search a library for a plains card, put it onto the battlefield and then shuffle. He's a little bit better than the Loyal Warhound simply because the plains comes in untapped, so you can use it right away. Claim Jumper, a 3 mana 3/3 with vigilance, and when it enters the battlefield if an opponent controls more lands than you, you may search a library for a plains card and put it onto the battlefield tapped. Then if an opponent controls more lands than you, repeat this process once. If you search a library this way, shuffle. If one of your opponents is ramping heavily, this card can definitely catch up with that player, as you can get 2 lands on ETB trigger, and in the best case you will get 2 more if Phelia flickers this one. Phelia can flicker non-land permanents, so you also play Archaeomancer's Map, a great turn 3 play because for 3 mana you get an artifact that says when it enters the battlefield search a library for up to 2 basic plains cards, reveal them and put them into your hand and then shuffle, so your land drops for the next few turns are already secured. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, if that player controls more lands than you, you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. And last but not least we play Core Cartographer, a 4 mana 2/2, and when it enters the battlefield you may search a library for a plains card, put it onto the battlefield tapped and then shuffle. And now let's talk about a few enchantments and artifacts that are very powerful in this deck. Blessed Sanctuary, a 5 mana enchantment, and prevent all non-combat damage that would be dealt to you and creatures you control. Furthermore, whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, create a 2/2 white unicorn creature token. This can prevent your creatures from being removed by burn spells, and in addition to that, if you flicker your token generators, you will get even more. Kafar's Crusade, a 5 mana enchantment, whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control. This card is definitely one of your win cons, as you can create the strongest board in the game in just one turn. Altar of the Brood, a 1 mana artifact, and whenever another permanent enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent puts the top card of his or her library into his or her graveyard. This 1 mana artifact does a lot of work, and especially in flicker decks it is really powerful. And now imagine playing your token generators onto a board with a very high devotion count. Dolmen Gate, a 2 mana artifact, prevent all combat damage that would be dealt to attacking creatures you control. At some point in the game your tokens and Phelia will start out not that strong, but you still want to keep attacking, especially with Phelia, so preventing all combat damage is necessary. In addition to that we play Panharmonicon, a 4 mana artifact, and if an artifact or creature entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. We all know how powerful these double trigger effects are, so we definitely have to play them. Last but not least we play Haystack, a 2 mana artifact, and for 2 mana tapping it, target creature you control phases out. At some point either Phelia will have accumulated a lot of +1/+1 counters, or Haystack will simply help you to protect your key pieces by making them phase out when your opponents try to interact with them. You want to win more? You get it. Delny, Streetwise Lookout, a 3 mana 2/2, and creatures you control with power 2 or less can't be blocked by creatures with power 3 or greater. If an ability of a creature you control with power 2 or less triggers, that ability triggers an additional time. Especially in the early game it helps to double Phelia's triggers to accelerate your game plan. Phelia isn't the only flicker effect that you play in this deck, so you also play Moonshaker Cavalry, an 8 mana 6/6 with flying, and when it enters the battlefield, creatures you control gain flying and get +X until end of turn, where X is the number of creatures you control. As I have mentioned earlier, we want to win by creating an army of tokens, so Moonshaker Cavalry will be the final overrun effect. And last but not least we play Elish Norn, Mother of Machines, a 5 mana 4/7 with Vigilance, and if a permanent entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. And now very important is that permanents entering the battlefield don't cause abilities of permanents your opponents control to trigger. Not only will this card accelerate your game plan, but it will also slow down your opponent's game plan. Alright guys, these were a few cards that I will play in Phelia, Exuberant Shepherd. Let me know down in the comments below which cards you would add to the deck, which legendary creature I shall feature next, and then I would say, see you in the next one. Goodbye guys.